Hey all, and welcome to Module 5. In this module, we explore the question of free will versus determinism. Many of us are familiar with this debate. The puzzle goes something like this. As human beings, we have the peculiar feeling that we are making free decisions. When I wake up in the morning, I can choose to get up or not, to eat Cocoa Puffs or peanut butter toast, to wear stripes or solids, or to mix and match moose and squirrel. Bonus points for whoever gets that Friends reference and who said it. Hint, it was a friend of a friend. Moving on. I experience, as Frank Jackson would say, the qualia, or the felt quality of picking or choosing from alternatives. Whatever I choose, there's always the possibility that I could have chosen other than I did. The range of my alternatives may not be limitless. For example, I might like to wear my comfy jeans, but perhaps they're still in the wash. Or maybe there aren't enough Cocoa Puffs and milk for that nourishing bowl of breakfast joy. Nevertheless, within my range of alternatives, I make a choice. My will, which is to say, that faculty of our conscious life which moves our bodies based on certain desires or inclinations or thoughts, my will is self-directed. The freedom of the will is an important concept to ponder, and not just for sheer curiosity's sake. It's also important to how we understand things like justice and human responsibility. For example, when a person or a company does something harmful, like an oil company causing a massive oil spill in the ocean, which harms an ecosystem, or when we consume non-renewable resources posing deep risks for the natural world, like limitless uses of plastics or the careless emission of carbon into the atmosphere, then we assign responsibility, or lack thereof. Responsibility presupposes a self-directed or unencumbered will. We make choices, and we're accountable to others and the world around us for the choices we make. And this is the basis of our understanding of justice. Choices can be praiseworthy, but they can also be reprehensible or blameworthy. Are there ever circumstances when a person is not held accountable or responsible for their actions or choices, or when we might consider them unfree actions or choices? For example, we would say that it's wrong for a bank clerk to open the main safe in the bank and to empty out all of the cash into a big canvas bag with a dollar sign printed on the front of it. If the clerk did this, then they would probably be fired. However, if we'd learned that the clerk was forced at gunpoint to empty the safe, their hands shaking while fumbling to bag up the cash, then we're looking at a completely different scenario. Since they were coerced, by coercion we mean being forced against one's will. Since they were coerced to empty the safe, it was the gunman we'd hold responsible rather than the clerk. Under coercion, the clerk has not made a free choice. Therefore, we wouldn't hold them accountable for stealing the cash. If an action or choice is blameworthy or praiseworthy, it suggests the reality and our lived experience of responsibility and free decision-making. But to what extent are the choices we make really our own? In this module, we'll read a handful of selections that will help us to explore this question in metaphysics. We'll start with a writer called Baron de Holbach. De Holbach was a French Enlightenment philosopher and a proponent of the theory called hard determinism. This theory, hard determinism, asserts that free will is in fact an illusion. Our experience gives us the impression or the appearance of free choice making, but in reality what we call a choice is simply one effect in a long causal chain. Nature functions like a well-oiled mechanism. Since human beings in our conscious life are just as much a part of nature as any other part of the vast machine, then our will is subject to the same laws which govern the universe. In the same way that natural phenomena and nature's behavior is inherently predictable when we have enough information, or so his argument goes, the same could be said of human behavior. As de Holbach puts it, the will, quote, is nothing more than the modification of the brain. And he continues, quote, in whatever manner man is considered, he is connected to universal nature and submitted to the necessary and immutable laws that she imposes on all the beings she contains. End quote. Hard determinism holds that choice is a real phenomena, a peculiar essence in human beings, but as a modification of the brain's functions. It's just as subject to universal nature and its laws as rivers and trees and sticks and stones. Choice, therefore, is subject to the universal and causal laws of nature. So goes the position of hard determinism. But is hard determinism true? Or does it leave something out, especially when it comes to the question of moral responsibility? It would seem that if determinism is true, then all human behavior or action is the result of circumstances or causes outside of our control. Here's a startling example. If the actions of the Third Reich are subject to the causal laws of nature, laws which have functioned for billions of years, laws which determine the course of all future events long before the rumblings of World War in the mid-20th century, then the actions of the Third Reich were outside of its own control. If all choices are caused by nature, then it would seem that nothing is ever up to us in any real or meaningful sense. And if nothing is up to us, then moral responsibility and culpability, they vanish. If determinism is true, the consequence is this: then Mother Teresa, who is just as subject to the causal laws of nature as the Third Reich, is no more praiseworthy for her compassion as the Third Reich is blameworthy for its actions. But what about a middle path? Is it possible that we're both free and determined? This is a question raised by Peter van Inwagen, a contemporary philosopher at Notre Dame University. Van Inwagen argues that free will and determinism are in fact not compatible, and he reasons this way. If determinism is true, then it can't also be true that humans are morally responsible for their actions. The view of soft determinism holds that choices are always determined by causal laws, but we always have the experience of being able to choose otherwise. For example, nature's causal laws might predetermine that I choose to eat spicy sweet chili Doritos this morning for breakfast. Remember, that's the purple bag and objectively the best tasting. But this doesn't mean that I couldn't have chosen something else to eat instead. I might have been determined to choose the spicy sweet Doritos, but I could have always chosen something else instead. Soft determinism, sometimes called the compatibility theory, holds that even though my choices are determined, I could always have done otherwise than I did. Van Inwagen, however, rejects this approach. And he rejects this approach based on Leibniz's principle of non-contradiction. If it's true that my actions are determined, then it cannot also be true that I am free, since these two statements directly contradict one another. Compatibility theory, therefore, is a little bit like having your cake and eating it too. If my choice is predetermined by nature, this logically excludes the possibility that I could have acted otherwise. To Van Inwagen, compatibility theory and hard determinism struggle to account for the question of moral responsibility, of creative human activity, and of our own lived experience as human beings. And building on these debates, we'll also read from contemporary philosopher Roderick Chisholm. Chisholm makes a distinction between what he calls imminent causation and transient causation. Chisholm explains transient causation as the circumstances which shape or limit the choices we make. These may include things like psychological or sociological or cultural factors which might shape or affect our will and our intellect and the choices that we make. Imminent causation, distinct from transient causation, Chisholm explains, refers to the creative movement of the will within these circumstances. According to Chisholm, each of us, when we make choices, is kind of like a prime mover, as he puts it. We are the creative author of our actions. While transient causation, or transient causes or factors affect the range of actions we might commit ourselves to, or the choices we make, still, the choices I can make are the result of the will's movement or creative action. And as an example, we might think of Martin Luther King Jr. working within the constraints of white supremacy in America during the civil rights movement. While systematic unjust laws like Jim Crow undermined African American liberty, working within these constraints of transient causation, civil rights leaders authored creative change for the sake of justice. This would be analogous to Chisholm's view of imminent causation. To Chisholm, the language of imminent and transient causation might be useful for considering how choice is, 1, shaped by context in the world we inhabit, and 2, the creative effect of human intellect and volition. which is to say, by volition we mean the movement of the will. But what do you think? This week in our discussion, we'll consider these questions together. Why does de Holbach argue that free will is an illusion? What are some of the reasons he gives? And do you find these reasons convincing or compelling? What are the implications for moral responsibility if determinism is true? Why does Van Inwagen argue that determinism and free will are not compatible with one another? And do you think he makes a convincing argument? Do you think our choice is ultimately the result of causes beyond our control? Or is choice the result, in part, of our own creativity? How might Chisholm's distinction between immanent and transient causation respond to this question? And do you find his position a convincing alternative to hard determinism? As you think through these issues and as you talk about them together, I want you to lean on the readings. Try to find examples to support your position. This week, remember, there's no paper due, but be sure to spend some time thinking about your final paper, which will be due at the end of the last module. As always, I'm here to help. Remember this week to breathe in and to breathe out. I'm happy to talk with you by email or Zoom or by phone about anything that you want to discuss. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope that you have a good week. I hope that you're feeling encouraged as we near the end of our semester together. Be well, and be sure to take good care of yourself and take good care of the folks around you.